placement here? Hello, everybody. This is Faiz Shakir, again, campaign manager for Bernie Sanders. We've had a number of these campaign update briefings, and I'm here with you again tonight to deliver another one. And it's a momentous night because, as many of you heard and read earlier today, we released a Q4 fundraising total, which demonstrates that our campaign is a movement that is growing stronger by the quarter. In fact, is setting historic records for individual donors and individual contributions, more than any presidential candidate in American history, obviously making the case why this is a movement that can have and has the power to defeat Donald Trump in his best position to transform America. And tonight, obviously, the fundraising is at the top of a lot of news sites, and from my perspective, from our perspective as a campaign, that money, while nice because it helps fund the campaign, helps us do all the things we need to do to help win, the most important element of that money is the fact that it means people, and we win with people power. Each of those, that $34.5 million Q4 total. In fact, the entire fundraising total of this entire campaign is built on the backs of $18 donations at a time. Not a single billionaire contributing to this campaign, and it takes a lot of people to build that kind of success, and we're fortunate to have the best volunteer base in America, the best donor base in history. And I thought, because of the importance of volunteers, you've been with me in many other campaign updates. I have had people alongside me who are the Iowa State Director talk about our Iowa plan. In New Hampshire, I remember we talked with some field organizers to talk about some of our field approaches. And so tonight, given the big fundraising news, I thought we should talk to one of our small dollar donors. And so with us tonight, Jan, why don't you come right up here? This is Jan Taylor. Jan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So Jan is correct me if I'm wrong, but you are a small dollar donor to Bernie Sanders. Jan, tell us, where are you from and how much have you contributed to Bernie Sanders?
Well, I'm from Iowa City, and I've made small donations because I am a retired, fixed income widow who was a teacher. So I'm not just rolling in money. However, I have been able to give of my time, try to get over to our office in Iowa City and do phone calling one day a week, also knocking on doors when we have the weekends of action. I'm not sure what my total is. My first donation, I think, was maybe a $2.70. I've done some 27.50s. Occasionally, I think I was feeling guilty for not having spent more time at the office, and I gave 10 one time. So I am definitely a small donor who gives of my time and my home. I have an extra bedroom in my 2-bedroom apartment, and I have opened my home to people who come in from, say, Chicago for a weekend of action.
Amazing. Jan, there's so much to unpack there. Obviously, exactly the type of people who are the backbone of our campaign. I mean, let's talk about one element, because you said you were a teacher. It is a fact that teachers as a profession constitute the most number of individual donors as a profession of any profession in America. So you are among an illustrious group of people who we are so honored to have, because teachers, of course, as we're fighting for raising their pay in America and treating them with the respect that they deserve and valuing teaching again in America. Tell us about your teaching experience yourself. So you're a teacher here in...
Well, I started out in Texas in 1962. My yearly salary there was $4,800 a year. And over time, I said, surely by my retirement, they'll be paying teachers what they're worth. They still are not. Even with a PhD and some college teaching, I was at maxed $48,000 a year. So very, very minimal wage for teachers.
Who did you teach? Most recently, who have you been teaching? You're an elementary school teacher?
I started as an elementary school teacher. I ended up as a teacher in the education department at Clark College in Dubuque. And then after retirement, I now substitute. And little ones wear me out, although I used to teach second graders and third graders. So I usually teach middle school and high school, and also some special ed, children with special needs.
Jan, give me a sense of why Bernie. So, like, what inspired you to even get involved? And you've done many layers of involvement. It wasn't just the donations, which we'll talk a bit about. You've already mentioned, but you've given your volunteer time. You've been opening up your house to people to help the campaign. But what inspires you to do that? What about Bernie Sanders?
I guess I've waited a lifetime for a number of things to change in our government, and over the last 15 or so years, climate change has been a big concern of mine, and we seem to fiddle around at the edges. How many years ago did Al Gore write his book, and little has been done. I bought my hybrid car, so I hope I'm doing a little bit that way. But if we don't do something about climate change now, I look at the future generations. Maybe we'll only have 2 generations that we need to teach. We've got to handle climate change. When Bernie came out saying that's a high priority of his, putting money behind his words in his plan, I said he's the candidate for me, and this was the last 4 years ago when I supported him as he was running against Hillary.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't also ask you, Jan, given that you are here in Iowa, how are you feeling about the campaign here in Iowa?
I'm excited about it. It's very active, and I'm finding a lot of people who agree with me and are ready to support Bernie.
And so maybe a last question, just unpack the caucus. I mean, you've been a caucus goer yourself.
Oh, yes.
Tell people, encourage people why they want to come down here to Iowa and help you out. What's a caucus like?
Well, it's a town hall meeting in so many ways. We enter at 7 o'clock. If you're later than that, you can't come in. We divide into groups. If I'm supporting Bernie, I will be with the Bernie group. They take a count of how many people total are in the room, and each candidate must get 15% of that number to be a viable, in quotes, viable candidate. There will be some candidates possibly with this large field who won't even get that 15%. Then they have a second count, and those who aren't, quote, viable, those people can go to their second choice. And there's a lot of begging and cajoling and persuading. And yes. Oh, yeah, a lot of that. And then some discussion and talk of what we would like to see in the platform.
Yes.
But people can come and just do that first vote. If they're in a viable group this time, you can go home. After that, you don't need to stay for the platform discussion.
And so, Jan, give us a sense of like what you're seeing out there. You go out there knocking some doors as well. How are you feeling about the campaign and what you're hearing from people as they knock doors? What kinds of reactions are you getting at the doors?
Positive ones, and a lot of people who have not caucused before will say, yes, I will plan on going to the caucus. I keep telling them that we have a large input in the national picture because we are the first to cast those votes. I'm not saying that Bernie has all the doors I knock on locked up. There is great variety in Iowa City for every one of the candidates. But there are a number of people who say either Bernie is their first choice or their second. And so I'm feeling very good about it this time.
That's great. Well, Jan, we're honored to have somebody like you, not only as a donor, but as a major volunteer for this campaign. And we try and strive, I'd say, from the campaign leadership through every person on this campaign, try to do you right and make sure that we are honoring the small dollar donations that you and many others are giving to us. So thank you for everything you're doing. It was
Thank
nice
you very
to meet
much.
you. Thank you, Jan. Appreciate it. So that's Jan Taylor, Iowan, who is going to be key and critical to our success in Iowa. I mean, you see the kinds of people that are attracted to the movement. That many of the things that Jan said are also true of many of the staff who joined Bernie Sanders. There's a lived experience, passion, and a conviction around why people have joined this campaign, and it's always heartwarming to hear them, and it inspires me. I'm sure it inspires many of you to continue to remain engaged and keep fighting for this. We're so close at the cusp. So as I was mentioning at the beginning, we're 34.5 million raised in the fourth quarter. Thank you for giving us the financial resources we need to wage the strongest campaign we can. We are throwing everything at it with the resources we have. We're doing advertising. We're hiring a bunch of staff. We have the biggest Iowa staff of any campaign. We have a greatest volunteer force of any campaign. We are bringing people in, even from out of the state, to help knock doors. We're doing everything we can because we understand the importance of what's at stake and honoring, I said, the resources that people have given us. So I wanted to say a few other things. You probably heard when I started some of my campaign updates. I think we started this a few weeks ago, and I put four fingers up in the air and I said, we got to win the fourth quarter. And I'm honored to report to you that we did in fact win the fourth quarter. I feel that strongly, that this campaign performed better than any other campaign in the fourth quarter. It's put this campaign in a position to win the nomination. We are now in the final sprint, and over the course of that fourth quarter, we racked in some major endorsements. We rolled out some major policies. We did some terrific events, all the way, if you go back to Queensbridge in New York, with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, to Congresswoman Ilhan Omar in Minnesota, and Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib in Michigan. And we had some great endorsements of groups like People's Action and Center for Popular Democracy that have really been helping us build a lot of steam and helping us kind of gain traction. You're seeing in this last fundraising report 300,000 new donors coming into this campaign. Amazing number in its own right. I think many other campaigns would be honored to have 300,000. We have 300,000 new donors to this campaign, 40,000 new donors just in the last day. And I think it's core to us. I mean, many of you understand that if we are to win, it will be because we inspired a lot of people who are not conceived of as traditional voters to come out and vote for the first time, or maybe for the first time in a long period of time. So they might even be first-time voters. They might have been people who've checked out of the political process, but they'd be coming back in because they feel inspired about the possibility of great change. And I think if you look at some of the fundraising numbers and you dig into the 300,000 new donors, you are already seeing people coming out of the woodwork who may have become cynical about politics, but see in Bernie Sanders real hope for real change. And I think that is giving us confidence that there can be the kind of expansion of the electorate that we need to see. A bunch of new voters coming out, not only to win the primary, but to win the general election. That is how you defeat Donald Trump. You aren't going to beat him with money, because he's going to have more money than anybody. They're sitting on like over $100 million cash on hand. No Democrat is going to be able to top it. The only way you beat him is with people. And not only that, but inspiring, the 40% of people who don't historically vote in presidential elections to come out and get involved and to vote. And I believe that Bernie Sanders is that candidate who could inspire people to get involved and to vote, possibly for the first time in their lives. Let me give you a state of the race update. Today, you may have seen in the Washington Post that I'd urge you to read it. Senator Sanders had some remarks about his concerns over Joe Biden, and we had a conversation about whose candidacy is best positioned to defeat Donald Trump. We feel strongly on this campaign that we have a much better argument to make against Donald Trump than Joe Biden. And I think, I'd urge you to go and read that Washington Post article. It's up on their website. And I think there's a few elements to kind of highlight there about Joe Biden that we've discussed. One is his record, right? You think about Biden's record, it's been all over the map and hasn't been truly fighting for the working class. When you look at the trade agreements that he has voted for that have cost America 4 million jobs, when you go look at his support of a bankruptcy bill that made it harder for people with student loan debt to discharge that debt, for people with medical debt to discharge that medical debt, making it much harder for working class families. When you look at the student loan crisis all across America, in part how that was created with a bankruptcy bill that that Joe Biden helped push through. And then in addition to that, supporting a Wall Street bailout, of course, and then in addition to that, a record of having stood for freezing Social Security benefits, cutting Social Security benefits, raising the retirement age, cutting Medicare. These are things that he's openly talked about many times over, and is receiving donations from people who've been advocates for cutting Social Security benefits. So there's a record that when you put it up with Bernie Sanders, who you take any one of those issues, he was exactly on the other side of them, right? Fighting against that bankruptcy bill, fighting against those trade agreements, protecting American workers, fighting against that Wall Street bailout, fighting to protect and expand Social Security. So you measure them up, and it should be generally a clear case, right, about who's best positioned with the record to go to the working class of America, say, you've been betrayed by Donald Trump, but I have a record that you can believe in. Who is that candidate? In our minds, very clearly, it is Bernie Sanders. And in addition to that record, then, of course, is associated with it judgment, right? So in Joe Biden, you have somebody, of course, who has made some decisions that were wrong, and it should cause you concern about a person's judgment. And obviously, he voted for the war in Iraq, not only voted for it, but cheered for it, supported it, and even through the period of time in which it became clear that Iraq was a disaster, Joe Biden was still saying, oh, you know, we got to succeed there, or we can stay in Iraq. And of course, now as we see Iraq once again in the headlines for the kind of destabilization, dysfunction that we're watching in that country, all the things that Bernie Sanders, again, had raised concerns would occur before that war. We're seeing them continue to spill out, and Joe Biden was, of course, advocating for it. That's a clear distinction in judgment. And I think that that's important for people to know. And then you take record, you take judgment, you take money, right? And then you look at the fact that Joe Biden has decided to wage his campaign by raising money into a super PAC, something he, a few years ago said candidates shouldn't do, is raising money into a super PAC, and he's going into high dollar fundraisers and no doubt making promises and pledges about how much influence people can have over policy in those closed door rooms. You add that all together, record, judgment, money, and you've got, I think, a harder case to make that he's the best position to beat Donald Trump. So we're going to continue to make our case for why Bernie Sanders is the best position candidate to defeat him, and we'll look forward to playing this out over the next few weeks. Got an important case to make, and that's what these elections are about. They're fundamentally about choices, and we got to make sure those choices are clear for people so they have an opportunity to wade in here in Iowa and elsewhere. In addition to that, I think, before we get into some questions, and if you have some, please send them in. As you know, I always eager to take some. I think the last thing I'd say is about beating Donald Trump. They announced today, right, the only campaign that has raised more money than ours in the fourth quarter. He is the sitting president of the United States. He has certain advantages. They raised, I think, 46 in the fourth quarter, $46 million. And from my perspective, hey, that's a number, in fact, that Bernie Sanders, if he's the nominee, can compete with, right? And I think we'd attract a lot of donations to this campaign. You're talking about Bernie Sanders competing with 12 other people in a Democratic race. You get past that moment, you get into a general election, consolidate the Democratic Party around our united goal to defeat Donald Trump, and you inspire a lot of people to give again. 99.9% of our donors can give again. I think we'd expand that pool, and then you'd have the financial resources and the people power to go up against Donald Trump. But more importantly, the excitement and enthusiasm that we need. You see in Jan a conversation around people who are fired up to give both from their pocketbooks, but also their time, energy, and excitement of making the case to their friends and their colleagues around their communities that Bernie Sanders is the right choice. When you take that energy and excitement, you expand that out nationwide, that's how you got to beat Donald Trump. And I think there's a real concern that if you don't have that energy and excitement, his side will, quite frankly, and he'll motivate, inspire his base. So we got to do everything in our power to expand the electorate. Okay, let me see if there's any questions. I'm going to see if there we go. Erman on Facebook. How are the polls looking? Oh, there's always. Let me take a moment to talk about polls, because I try not to obsess about them too much. When the polls are up, you end up riding this roller coaster of poll emotions, and try not to focus too heavily on the polls. And the truth of the matter is, we're doing fine. You see the tracking up in basically every average, whether it's the national averages or many of the state averages. Bernie Sanders becoming much more competitive. Obviously, nationally, Joe Biden remains in first place. That's why I think it's important for us to explain our contrast and to share our differences and to give people real choices. But we feel good about the trajectory of where these polls are going. But the reason I don't like to talk too much or care too much or obsess too much over polling is because ultimately we know that the case for us to win means expanding the electorate. And a lot of those people, the people who we would need to come out and support Bernie Sanders, are not captured in polls. They are not classified as likely voters. They are screened out. They are not contacted for a variety of means, right, or for a variety of reasons. So I try not to obsess too much over the polls. We got to find and identify voters who can become likely voters and then, in fact, become voters on caucus night here on February 3rd and obviously everywhere else around the country on primary days. So we're going to work very hard to try to identify those voters, bring them out, and I think the polls generally do not capture a lot of the people who we're trying to bring into the process. Let's see if there's another question out there. Denise on Facebook, what does my donation go to for the campaign? I can give $10 right now. Great. Thank you, Denise. That's wonderful. So let's talk about what the donations are helping us do. There are a lot of things to fund on this campaign, as you can imagine. First, I'd start with the fact that we try very hard to make sure that we honor the fact that a lot of our donors are $5, $10 donors. And the first thing is to make sure that we're not spending money inefficiently or unwisely. So, a lot of we have undertaken a lot of efforts on this campaign to make sure we're conserving, saving resources, expending them wisely on the things that we think will most help us win. So, what are some of those things? Well, we have staff, right? Staff is really critical. We have over 800 people on this campaign. It's a large number. Here in Iowa, we have over 250 people here on the ground in Iowa. Another campaign I don't think is matching that, and so obviously having the resources. But then when you hire somebody, you also got to arm that person, right, with literature and information, with the tools they need to succeed, computers, phones, et cetera, right? Making sure that they have the ability to connect and do all the things they need to succeed and bring people into the process. In addition to that, we're of course advertising here in Iowa. We're on the air. We're doing digital advertising across the country. It can be expensive to be on TV, as you well know. In addition to advertising and staff, you're talking about moving Senator Sanders around the country, building out events. There's no other campaign that does more events than we do. And on it, like even today, many of us here in this room are exhausted because we've had a number of events all day long on a bus traveling all over Iowa, and those of course take money and resources. We also have a bunch of surrogates and wonderful chairs of this campaign, and we're always trying to bring people in, and as we bring them in, we try to bring them out to events and bring them around the country so that they can make the case directly to voters for why we need their support, and so we have a talented operation that helps bring people all over the country who can make the case for Bernie Sanders even when Bernie Sanders isn't there himself. So those are just some of the ways in which we utilize the resources as efficiently as possible to make sure we are competing. Anything else? Let's take a last question here from Corey Joe on Facebook. Are you trying to recruit new voters? Oh yeah. We are definitely trying to recruit new voters. And I think this is I've argued we believe we have the most ambitious path to the nomination. It's the most difficult path because we feel that in order to win, we have to attract new voters. These are anyone from first-time voters, people over the age of 18 or over. We're also trying to attract people who are in the working class who have maybe not dialed into elections in recent history, become cynical about politics. And so our organizing, both here in Iowa and around the country, is focused on going into certain areas and identifying where those voters could be compelled to come out and vote in a way. And so that it's ambitious because we are asking people who have not voted to vote, whereas other campaigns really just hone in on just a smaller slice of the populace and say, okay, well, these people are historically the ones who vote, and these are the only ones we talk to. Of course, we're going to talk to them as well, but our goal and our job is to try to go beyond that. And we spend a lot of time, effort, and energy to reach out beyond people who are likely to vote. And, if we do it right, it is what the movement, it is what the transformation is all about. If you have a bunch of young people who show up on caucus night here in Iowa, you have a bunch of people of color who show up, you have a bunch of working class people from Walmart, Amazon employees, and Target employees, Starbucks employees, who constitute, again, some of our best donors on this campaign, that we're going to be in for a really great night. But if those people don't show up, and then it'll be harder. Our path is harder. So we have the most ambitious path, and we'll hopefully get there. I'll conclude by just saying that this is a movement that is growing. We're feeling good about where we stand as a campaign. We have to remain a campaign that is welcoming and extends the open hand to people to join us. And I think that's important for those of us. Like Jan has been fighting for Bernie Sanders for a long time. Many of us have been there, believe in Bernie Sanders, have been there for a very long period of time. And we have to make allowance for those who have not been there for a long period of time and give them the opportunity to go on their Bernie journey and get there and accept that they may have differences of opinions with us, they may have different approaches, but ultimately at the end of the day, they may be grounded in a common bond of defeating Donald Trump and truly transforming America and to address these injustices that we face, environmental injustices, racial injustices, social injustices, economic injustices. They see it, they feel it in their lives, and they just need to believe that this movement, this Bernie Sanders movement, welcomes them into it, and that they can play a critical role in helping transform America. So I will offer you that as our parting 2 cents to continue to think open-mindedly about bringing people into our movement in the home stretch. We are in a good place. Thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you for making us a historic campaign that has attracted the most individual donors and donations in presidential history. Let's go forward and win this damn thing. All right, talk to you guys soon. Appreciate it.